Oh, BGP, this is comical. Let's unpack some of the misinformation and blatant lies you spewed in my comment section. Let's address your first point. You claim that I didn't do any research on CJ's response to you and Obsidian's comments.
So before I get into why I'm responding to this comment, for context, I want to show the part of the video in which why I asked the question of how did African Americans assist with immigration policies during the civil rights movement.
Had it not been for the advocacy of Black people in the United States and our fights for civil rights, many Central and South Americans wouldn't even be able to be here in the U.S. That is a sad reality.
So I kind of figured you were going to use the Immigration Act of 1965, aka the Hart-Celler Act. And the reason why I knew you were going to use it is because it's been used before to throw in the faces of the quote-unquote Latino community when addressing anti-Blackness with certain Latino creators who are exhibiting anti-Blackness. It not only throws it in the face of the person you're addressing anti-Blackness with, but it's throwing it into the face of all of those who fall under the Latin American diaspora, and particularly indigenous people. And it kind of turns into the "we did this for you, so how dare you be anti-Black to us" type of scenario, which then leads into a pissing match of these other communities saying things like, well, hold up, but we did things for you as well. And now the very important information that you gave addressing the anti-Blackness gets very much so lost in the arguments of who did what and when and how. And it does cause an erasure to history, because it wasn't just Black Americans who were part of the civil rights movement. It wasn't just the Black Panthers. It was also the Brown Berets. It was the Young Lords. It was the Rainbow Coalition. It was the Chicano movement. And I know some of you younger creators know the history of what you were taught in school, but I really implore you to talk to some of the old heads, because they will tell you that the unity back then was something unmatched at the time, and still is. They actually don't understand these younger generations and the division that has been caused between all of our communities. And every community has always given credit where credit is due when it comes to the influence with amongst each other in gaining civil rights. The truth of the matter is there is a lot of intersectionality between our communities throughout the last 500 years of us being introduced to one another. And that's because we shared in similar struggles and oppression. We saw each other as kinfolk and not the enemy. And colonizers have done their best to divide and conquer those allyships. And they've succeeded several times. But somehow we've always come back together under a unified branch of saying, hey, we are all sick and tired of this shit. Now I'm going to show another clip from your video, which I don't appreciate you misconstruing the commenter's words.
We fought for our rights, not Black people.
Now, the full comment actually stated several international agreements, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We fought for those rights ourselves, not Black people, so please be respectful. Now, I also noticed that all of her comments have been removed, whether she was blocked and they disappeared or whether they were deleted. But that does not leave context to what she actually was talking about in that comment, which was how indigenous people have been fighting for immigration policies and open borders for several decades. In which your comment saying that if it wasn't for Black Americans, we wouldn't have immigration reform, when in fact it erases the history of all the fights that indigenous people have been doing for several years prior.
Used to say Native Americans have been fighting for our rights since colonial times while your people were still slaves.
And in this comment, she actually stated, while it's true that African American civil rights movements had wide-ranging impacts, Native Americans have been fighting for our rights since colonial times while your people were still slaves. Maybe a better word would have been enslaved, but she was not wrong. And it doesn't negate the fact that enslaved people weren't also fighting for their rights. But when it comes to borders and immigration, this is something that indigenous people have been fighting for since the start of the invasion over here in the Western Hemisphere.
Why is it that whenever Black people say that Black people started something, initiated something, or whatever, people want to jump in and say, well, actually, a non-Black creator on here tried to tell me that, quote, it is a common misconception that African Americans were the face of the civil rights movement. She also tried to tell me what anti-Blackness is and is not. There was collaboration across various groups. Of course, I talk about this often. However, the civil rights movement in the US was primarily led and initiated by African Americans. This fact doesn't take away from contributions of allies or other groups. It merely acknowledges the historical reality that the literal blood, sweat, and tears of African Americans got the movement started. And get this, she pointed to the Rainbow Coalition as evidence of broader involvement across communities, which is true. But without recognizing that Fred Hampton, a prominent member of the Black Panther Party, founded that coalition. It's not a conspiracy or misconception to state that African Americans were the face of the civil rights movement. It's a historical fact. She also claimed that African Americans and the civil rights movement did not influence immigration reform in the US. Gabriel Chin, who is an immigration law professor at the University of California, Davis, and the co-editor of a book called the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, stated otherwise. The Civil Rights Revolution was responsible for a relaxation of immigration laws. The Civil Rights Movement was intimately connected with immigration reform. Black Americans and their allies fought for the poor in other lands as well as the United States. And in an interview, he emphasized that the 1965 Act has to be understood as a result of the civil rights movement and the general effort to eliminate race discrimination from U.S. law. Now, I have acknowledged that the Immigration Act had its fault. It's American politics. Of course, there are faults. But this does not negate Professor Chin's assertion that the civil rights movement was intimately connected with immigration reform and that Black Americans and their allies fought for people on other lands as well as in the U.S. Those are his words. I've seen this creator overstep and try to dictate to Afro-Indigenous people and Black people how they should understand their own experiences. I've seen her make many enemies on this app, so I'm not taking it personally. She did, however, critique me for saying that many, and of course this does not mean all, but that many Central and South Americans wouldn't be able to be in the US had it not been for the racial reforms Black people have advocated for. I took that into consideration and edited that line out of my video. It's the debunking Black fragility one. And I only mentioned immigration because the original person talking about Black fragility that I was responding to was talking about migrants specifically. And now that I think of it, it's also interesting how she put forth all this energy through messages and videos to try and collect me, but didn't come for the person I was responding to in my original video that was spewing anti-Blackness. That said, I talk about on my page how borders aren't real and how Central and South Americans, particularly Indigenous people and their descendants, should be able to access North America without difficulty as our ancestors would do so prior to the imposition of colonial borders. But unfortunately, the borders exist, and because of the civil rights movement, this led to lots of racial reform, including in the realm of immigration, as I previously stated with citations from scholars in the field of immigration law. So anyways, don't let anyone make you feel like the civil rights movement being primarily associated with African Americans is some grand conspiracy. Like, please. And don't let someone try to actually you out of things you know about your history and people.
That's false. I knew immediately that what she said was true because it's an historical fact. African Americans were literally the pioneers of the civil rights movement. Was there help from Native Americans? Yes, absolutely there was. There were also a few white people that helped also. This doesn't erase the fact that the movement was still primarily African American. Irregardless of these facts, you and Obsidian doubled down on your misinformation, which is simply anti-Blackness on your and her part. Now, you claim that this causes native erasure of the Mexican/Latin American diaspora. It's kind of ironic because I touched on this in a previous video. Most of the people from Latin America were not trying to be associated with Black people. They were fighting for whiteness. Consider the words of Hispanic civil rights leaders like Gus Garcia. Gus said, "I know the Negroes aren't getting their full share of democracy, but frankly, I'm prejudiced against Negroes, and I do not believe that they are entitled to everything we get." Hector Garcia said, "We are not and have never been a civil rights organization." Personally, I hate the word. What did Garcia have against civil rights? Dr. Garcia didn't want to alienate whites in Texas or anywhere else by appearing to join the struggle of Black people for civil rights. John J. Herrera wrote, Latin Americans of Mexican descent belong to the Caucasian race and therefore white. BGP, you have no clue what you're talking about. I know more about Latin America than you ever could. This is why your comments are completely hilarious to me. I don't know why y'all do this. You guys will be very vocal about your disdain for black people, then when black people play it back, you start trying to gaslight us. Let's move on to your second point. You claim that I didn't call out the supposed pseudoscience of Jazzy, Gia, Tika, and the Syndicate. I don't think you understand what race, racism, and racial eugenics really are. I've noticed this from many of the live streams you hold and visit on TikTok. Race is a social construct, however there are varying differences from each race. Native Americans have differences in bone structure versus African Americans. This isn't scientific racism to point this out. This is the very thing that proves Native Americans were the first people of the Americas. Funny enough, I addressed this when Mateo was also spreading the same misinformation. Point 3. Now I've never pushed back on Native American creation stories because I know that is the beliefs of Native American people and I think that's fine. The Syndicate, however, were approaching from a scientific point of view, which is also fine, and no way does that cause Native erasure. I find this point highly ironic considering that so many of you will claim you believe in science when it's something you want to use against black people. The moment the science conflicts with your beliefs, you will refute it outright. It's very interesting to me. Let's move on. Points 4, 5, and 6 will be addressed together. You claim I was playing the Oppression Olympics with the whole Manny and Kit Kat situation when I called y'all out and allegedly minimized the WB word. This is an outright lie and you're trying to deflect. At no point did I ever minimize the WB word or its impact. I called you guys out on your hypocrisy in attempting to call out Kit Kat when you said nothing to Mano or Manny after both of them said the N-word multiple times. I literally have the receipts and how it all played out on this very channel, and you're gaslighting in my comments. This is crazy. Y'all said nothing until I called you guys out. You guys had the audacity to come after Kit Kat when you guys were pretending like it never happened. Native Mamas and Native Vibes were both chilling in Mano's live streams after the fact. I remember you guys continuously saying don't blame us for what he said, but took it upon yourselves to call out Kit Kat on your own. I want to highlight a point from your first comment. You say that I literally call everything anti-blackness. This statement right here literally shows how you have no concept of U.S. history or world history. Every place that got colonized by Europeans has anti-blackness within it. This is why many places have racial slurs for black people. This is why marrying white is seen as a come-up in many cultures. Anti-blackness is in every culture. I can present examples from every continent. Imagine gaslighting black people about their lived experiences, but getting upset at the thought of this being done to you. I don't play Oppression Olympics. I educate those of you who disrespect and dismiss the experiences and history of black people. Like you're currently doing right now, BGP. You say that I have made claims that black people built the U.S. economy, while forgetting the contributions of Mexican and Native Americans. Firstly, at no point did I ever dismiss or claim that Mexican people or Northern Native Americans didn't have any contributions to the U.S. economy. However, one thing that I will not ignore is the historical context. The U.S. was supposed to be a white man's haven. Before 1965, they weren't truly allowing anyone of color to immigrate to the U.S. So, the economy that generated the US's wealth was done so by slaves. This is why slavery was so lucrative for them. Now let's address this last point. You claim that race isn't hierarchical. Good Lord. Have you learned nothing from anything I've ever taught? You say there are laws that affect brown people that won't affect black people the same way and vice versa. What laws are these? Are you referring to immigration laws? You do realize that black people immigrate to the U.S. as well, right? You do realize that black people also get deported at a high rate also, no? You have no clue what you are talking about. You also state that I conflate colorism with racism. Colorism is literally a branch off of the tree of racism. You're once again displaying your ignorance on the subject. You cannot have colorism without racism. This is why y'all make a beeline for white people while telling your children not to bring home a black person. Like, are you serious? This is ultimately why black people are considered the lowest of the low socially and economically. You can't even argue with me on this because you guys still don't understand that no matter what comes out of your mouth, your subconscious will let me know what is going on in that head of yours. You say I invalidate natives from Latin America. Who is this? Mano, Manny, or Mateo? I'll stand 10 toes down on each one of those individuals. None of them are Mexican and none of them are connected to tribes. You say this isn't my place. Again, you are wrong. Out of all of them, I'm the only person with a true connection to Mexico and Latin America, seeing as my father is actually Mexican and immigrated to the US. It's crazy, because you don't see the issues with them saying fucked up shit and hiding behind a Native American title or a Mexican title. It's extremely problematic and you certainly shouldn't be defending this. And no, African Americans are not African. They are African descendants. This is what African American means. The problem with so many of you is that you claim things that are inauthentic to you. You get mad at people who point out the facts. When did I call you a white girl? I can't wait to see your response to this video.